All right, hello and welcome to our presentation. Today we will be sharing exploring world language pedagogies through multimodal visual arts perspectives. My name is Jody Paulson. I am an artist and the program director for art education.
Hello, my name is Brianna Sanchez, and I am an assistant professor and the program coordinator for world language teacher education.
Hello, my name is Mert. I'm a graduate student and a research assistant, and we are from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. I will be talking about the purpose here. In our study, the purpose is to explore world language pedagogies and interdisciplinary teaching through pre-service art teachers' experiences, perspectives, and artworks. And in other words, the purpose here is to explore pre-service teachers' perspectives of a literacies-based world language teaching lesson plan and how purposeful interdisciplinary planning can impact pedagogical practices in both disciplines.
We've supported the findings in this presentation with the following research. From Rhodes, Multimodality and Visual Arts, we have the following quote. When images are carefully planned, these visual considerations of text will support the images, and both can be used as meaning-making modalities, which deepen the interconnectedness of a multimodal approach to literacy. We'll be exploring in our presentation these multimodality methods for application in the classroom.
And then we have world language literacies. So traditional definitions of literacies focuses on the ability to read and write accurately. However, in the 21st century, the focus is on developing world language literacies, and that includes understanding and creating multimodal texts like web pages, communicating across cultural and geographical contexts, and using the language for a range of social, professional, academic, and everyday purposes. So instead of traditional ways, the focus is on meaning making, interpreting, creating, and preparing learners to be consumers and creators of multimodal text.
And our final piece of research concentrates on the importance of true interdisciplinary planning. When used successfully, students should not only be asked to analyze visual images and text to discern meaning, but they should also be taught the skills to purposefully manipulate and curate visual images and text in their visual communications so that the artwork does not simply function as a visual aid.
So we're going to talk to you about our research study. So to begin with, the participants and the context. So we had 9 pre-service art teachers participating in a workshop that I gave as a language teacher educator. The workshop took place in the room that you see in this presentation. And the purpose of the workshop was to present about world language literacies-based pedagogical approaches, as well as to dissect these approaches and discuss them in the perspectives and the experiences of the art teacher candidate. So the procedure was that we implemented the workshop. So in the workshop was a model of a literacies-based lesson that included a music video as the primary text. So we progressed through activities to build background knowledge. We watched the video, and I asked students to reflect on what they saw and what they heard in the video. We had discussion questions, and then at the end, I asked all students to create a self-portrait that showed the sense of the video as a sense of self. So the video was about, this is me. The video was called Soy Yo. And the students, since we didn't have time in the workshop, we assigned them to create their own representation of the self-portrait at a different date and to upload those self-portraits as data for our study. So again, the data was from the recorded workshop. We also had a interview with 4 teacher candidates. We had the artifacts of the self-portrait. And for the analysis, we took the self-portrait artifact as well as the art teacher candidate's commentary on the self-portrait from the interview and the recorded workshop data, and triangulated those to connect them to the visual arts standards, as well as the world readiness standards for learning languages.
So the National Visual Arts Standards support the methods that we'll be exploring today. I've chosen three of the anchors from the standards: creating, responding, and connecting. In the examples that we'll use, we will look at creating as investigation. So balancing the idea of freedom and artistic choice with the responsibility by the artist of those choices. We'll also be looking at responding as analysis, looking at how you choose the visuals and the text that you use, the contextual information for the artwork, how you choose and apply those. The last is connecting, that's the synthesis. So how all of these come together should be in authentic application. It should be a synthesis of a student's social, cultural, historical, and personal life that the creation follows. The meaningful works of art will be a synthesis of the creating, responding, and connecting.
And as for world readiness standards for learning languages, we will be talking about interpretive communication, presentational communication, connections, and cultural comparisons. So for interpretive communications, here learners understand, interpret, and analyze what is heard, what is read or viewed on a variety of topics. So for presentational communication, learners present information, they present concepts, ideas to inform, explain, maybe persuade or narrate on a variety of topics using appropriate media and adapting to various audiences of listeners or readers and viewers. When it comes to connections, learners connect with other disciplines and acquire information and diverse perspectives to use the language to function in diverse settings. And then the last one is cultural comparisons. Here, learners use the language to investigate, explain, and reflect on the concept of culture through comparisons of the cultures studied and their own.
So the way we're going to present the findings today are in three multimodal methods, and we are going to show you a quote that came from one of the pre-service art teachers, either in the workshop or the interview. We're going to connect that with the artifact that the individual made in the representation of the self-portrait. We are going to connect that to the visual art standards as well as the world language readiness standards. And then finally, we're going to show how that concept is reflected in professional practice. So the first quote we have here comes from an pre-service art teacher who was discussing the connections between pedagogical approaches for literacies and world language, as well as the interpretation and application of art, and how we can connect the disciplines through planning. So he said, I feel like it'd be pretty hard not to be a consumer of the arts and the texts around us because it's just so prevalent. It's constantly expanding. We have art from around the world at our fingertips.
So I'm hoping you're surprised by the image in front of you. It's not a traditional self-portrait. This student chose to fracture the self-portrait. So we have what would be the more traditional rendition of a self-portrait as the visual face, but in the margins of the fractured pieces, we have information. So upon looking more deeply, we can see embedded in this self-portrait authentic text and image choices. So if you look carefully, you can see some hand-drawn images that show someone working with clay, someone working with a camera, placement of text that is not a left to right, so up and down. So the artist shifted that a little bit, but placement of text that upon more careful reading would inform you that this is a student's lesson planning. So a big part of who this student is during their journey right now, and particularly at this institution, which if you look carefully is also present in the text that is embedded behind the visual imagery. So these are found materials from lived experience. So they are authentic choices for that student. That student is an educator at SIU. That student is in the arts. So in that responding and analyzing, that student has made choices contextual for their contextual information that is part of the process of not only his constructing of the artwork, but then our interpretation of that artwork.
So when we connect that to world readiness standards for learning languages, we focus on the interpretive communication in general. So how learners take text and interpret and analyze what they hear and what they read and what they view. And typically when we talk about interpretive communication and what students view, we are talking about text-heavy resources. So what we're suggesting as well is that we consider art, whether it has text or not, as something that we can teach our learners to interpret, analyze, and create in the world language classroom, as well as in the art classroom. So we're also talking about connections here. So how learners are making connection and acquiring information in diverse perspectives. And here highlighting the representation of self-portrait that looks much different than what you might think of typically.
And what we see is the idea of consumers of visuals and text that our first student mentioned in their quote is also reflected in artistic professional practice. This artist, 𝘠𝘭𝘠 has created a piece called Sisters, which has the drawn images on top of actual Chinese characters. So these are a combination of authentic use of language that represents that artist and in connection with the images and the found materials that, again, are part of lived experience, create deeper meaning for this particular piece of art. So that layering is already used and can be seen by our students in visuals surrounding them today.
So when we bring a text like this into the world language classroom, we can highlight to students that we use both text features and visual arts features to interpret the text. The next quote we have comes from a student who was discussing how her representation of the self-portrait was much different than the one given in the model, which was a more typical self-portrait of the face and the shoulders that for this project I created myself in order to dissect this activity. So she says, it's just my response to my favorite thing that I got out of the lesson, the idea of breaking the box, because we don't all fit in boxes. You know, this is me. This is just kind of that general idea of freedom and expression.
So in this particular art piece, the student has completely abandoned the idea of a traditional self-portrait. We do not see a face. We do not see any figurative component. But because the artist was given that freedom to explore, they chose handwritten doodles and phrases as what they feel was a self-portrait and an interpretation of a unique self-portrait. What we see when we look at professional practice is that there are artists that are using a combination of photographic image with that handwritten kind of urgent writing style that has kind of a very contemporary street feel to it. And if we start to combine that idea of the student's interpretation of a self-portrait and we layer it on top of more of a photographic approach, you have another way that you can deepen meaning. So you can take the idea of the photograph and you can layer it with the student's line work and phrases and even written typed text. If you do that layering, it really looks to the national standard that talks about investigating and the balance of freedom and responsibility. So the example I gave was an appropriated image by that artist, but then I layered over it the image created by hand by our student. So what we want the students to understand in this age where we have so many visual images at our fingertips as our students are talking about, but there is a responsibility in the use of that. So it wouldn't be appropriate for the students to appropriate the image used by another artist. But if they took an image, a photograph, and layered their own photo with their line work and their words, their phrases, then they have investigated both of those components of the creating national standard.
When we connect those concepts to the world readiness standards for learning languages, we're going to highlight presentational communication, which typically is in the form of a presentation, right? Our students speaking to the class or preparing something for an audience that they aren't able to communicate with in the moment. So what we want to encourage you is to consider the method that my colleague was talking about. And when we talk about a variety of topics using appropriate media and adapting to different audience, we want to encourage you to explore the concept of art making, combining the modes of text as well as visuals to create a presentation and to express meaning in the world language classroom. Our final method here is highlighted by a quote from a teacher that came through a discussion of making the application process of the model in the workshop more meaningful. Students highlighted a variety of ideas that included integrating arts throughout the lesson and as well as improving the application itself. So this student said, I feel like that could be space, referring to the space around the self-portrait model. I feel like that could be space that's filled with symbols of where they come from. In planning, give more examples showing different cultures for different students.
So finally, we have a more traditional approach to a self-portrait, semi-traditional. This one, obviously, the head is opening and symbols are bursting forth. But what the student has shown us is the use of those authentic symbols and language. So what was important to this student was to show that they love the outdoors, seen by the kayak, the camper, the pine trees, a love of their pets, the cat and the dog, where they're studying, SIU, that they're in art education and that art is important. We have the paintbrush there. So this student, as they referenced in their quote, wanted to fill that space with things that represent them. So these are authentic choices for the student. But what we have above is a narrow response that was given as a prompt for the assignment. So the students were invited to create the self-portrait using the phrase soyo. So this student did that, but this does end up being inauthentic choice for this student. The student is not Hispanic, Latinx. This student does not speak Spanish. A better choice for this student would have been an English phrase, #above. Where it would be appropriate is if this student was a language learner with that identity development emerging. So that would be appropriate choice for combining who they are with that language. But if that choice is not authentic, then we lose that idea of synthesis. So in the National Visual Arts Standards, the last component that we have is connecting all of those methods that we just talked about. So this student was then able to connect the social, cultural, historical, and personal life in the icons and images that she chose to surround her self-portrait. If allowed, that freedom that we talked about in the previous method, allowed the freedom to use her own language, that would synthesize all of the aspects of that assignment and allow that student to have an authentic meaning in her artwork.
When we connect to the world readiness standards for learning language, we're going to highlight here the cultural comparisons. So how our learners, our students use language to investigate, explain, and reflect on the concept of culture through comparisons of the cultures studied and their own. And to go a little bit farther than what you can understand from the standard is to an exploration of language learner identity. And sometimes as language educators, we forget to highlight with our students that the development of a language learner identity is really critical to the language learning process. So art making and integrating art within our lesson plan for self-expression of that language learner identity, as well as exploring art that represents the identity of other language speakers, can be a critical area of developing world language literacies.
So in professional practice, we have the artist 𝘠𝘭𝘭𝘭𝘭, who shows an image of a woman in her cultural attire, which is authentic, and then overlaid it with images, patterns, and colors that some would feel are disconnecting, that there's a dissonance between the image, the patterns, the attire, but then adds the language, we the people, to show that there is an authenticity for where that person lives, where they were grown, and that person's culture, and makes that idea of what we feel is not connected become connected through the text that is chosen.
So in terms of the implications of our interdisciplinary work, we've landed on the idea of authentic interdisciplinary expressions in languages and visual arts. So to explore the implications, we have given you another visual created by an art teacher candidate who was not a participant in this study.
So this piece was created by 𝘠𝘭𝘭𝘭𝘭. It's named Sacred Family. This piece was done in response to a trip that this student did last summer as a service trip for her church to a parish in Guatemala. This student has been taught the different methods that we've outlined for you today. So in creating this artwork, this student first chose to concentrate on what we would call a traditional response to a self-portrait prompt. We have the face that is created with two sides. So again, artistic choice is noted. She chose to show the left side in lighter colors, the right side in darker colors, showing her vision, which is from Southern Illinois, with those that she met while in Guatemala. On this piece, she has created a background out of a map. This map is authentic. It is showing the area that she traveled on both sides. The left side is Southern Illinois. The right side is Guatemala. There is text on the artwork on both sides that on this right side is in Spanish, and the map is in both Spanish and English. When you look more carefully at the art piece, you will see that she has also used her own handwriting. So she is learning Spanish. She wouldn't consider herself a Spanish speaker at this point, but it was important for her to try out her Spanish on this side, as she was asked to do in her travels, and then to write in English for her meaning making. So she's embedded all of these components. She's made artistic choices that do not follow always strict self-portrait prompts. She has made choices about her text in both English and Spanish. Her maps are authentic to her journey, and her handwriting deepens and shows her personal lived experience.
So today we highlighted three different multimodality methods to connect visual arts and world language teaching. And here we have a quote that supports our research. The ideal worker of the next decade is T-shaped. They bring deep understanding of at least one field, but have the capacity to converse in the language of a broader range of disciplines. And you can find contact information here. If you have any questions, we would love to answer them. And Thank you so much for your time.